This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to announce the release of my new book, Obama's True Legacy, How He Transformed America. There's a reason why Mike Huckabee calls it a ferocious and chilling read. Order it now at Amazon.com or at FrontPageMag.com. Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, another fantastic program with another fantastic guest. But first, a few in-house matters. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember we are a fan-generated program struggling under the deep state, all the shadow banning, the censorship, the punishments. It's always tough for us. So please, subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell. Subscribe to our Rumble channel, hit the bell. Go to jamieglazov.com. If you can, donate to the show, support the show, or subscribe to our newsletter. And of course, Annie Cyrus's liveuptofreedom.com. Make sure you support Annie, who's fighting on the front lines as well. And now on to the most important matter this evening. With us tonight, Daniel Greenfield, a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the editor of the blog The Point at frontpagemag.com. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Daniel, your new book is out, Domestic Enemies, the Founding Fathers' Fight Against the Left. Fascinating read. I've been reading it the last couple days. Let's just begin with you telling us why you wrote this book.
So to set the scene, it was 2020, back during the days of the pandemic, the lockdowns, then the race riots and the election rigging. And there were bits and pieces of history that I already knew that started falling into place, and I began researching more. And there was this chronic feeling of doom that pervaded much of the conservative movement, or just in general, people who were uncomfortable with this. And they felt like this is all just impossible. The America we knew has forever been lost. And what I set out to do was two things with this book. One was to, I call this a 1619 project for the American left, tracing the true origins of the American left, but also just to send a message to people that we have dealt with this before. America was built on fighting these kinds of leftist and other radical abuses. We have dealt with this before. We can survive this. We can thrive despite it. This is part of the struggle that has defined our history.
Well, thank you, Daniel. And it's such an original book. And a lot of people think that maybe the left, it somehow, got energized and got really strong maybe during the 60s with the anti-war movement and all those protests on campus. And your book very clearly shows that the left was making trouble from the very beginning of American history. And of course, you touch on it even much more profoundly because you talk about the serpent being in the Garden of Eden. And, I've given thought to this my whole life, just in terms of trying to understand what happened in the Soviet Union. Because the roots of what happened in the Soviet Union, as you have documented in all your works and you touch on, of course, in your new book here, is that as long as there is quote-unquote inequality, and I put that in quotes because there will always be inequality if there's freedom, but there will always be man's and humans' attempt to become gods. There will always be humans' lust for and yearning for that apple in the Garden of Eden. Can you talk a little bit about that before we keep going? That this is the serpent's lie, and it's very hypnotic to humans, and it was there from the very beginning of American history as well.
For example, the Bible tells us that the poor will always be with you. Yet the leftist premise, the premise of social justice, is that we can create some sort of ideal society that will do what God cannot. It will eliminate inequality, eliminate poverty. Of course, we've seen over and over again, whether it's the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, what they actually do is create virtually universal poverty. They create equality by just taking away more and more from people and creating the small elite. But the left really is animated by this idea that given power, they can create the ultimate society. And the reality is, when given power, what they actually do is they destroy everyone who does not fit with their abstract idea. The American founding was based on the understanding that humans do have limitations. We're sinful people. We are not going to be perfect. We're not going to create this ideal, perfect society. And we have to be satisfied with imperfection. We have to be satisfied with accepting people and limiting the power of government. Whereas the leftist revolutions, beginning, as I write in the book, with the French Revolution, were based on creating this ideal, this perfect society, one that would eliminate all the problems. And that's why the American Revolution ended. It ended with the defeat of the British, the end of colonial rule, and the creation of a new political system. Whereas the French Revolution, leftist revolutions just kept on going. They kept on killing people primarily, because that is what revolutions do. If you define a revolution simply as independence, well, then you have independence, the revolution is over. If, however, you define revolution as the pursuit of a utopia, of a perfect society, then you have to keep killing on and on and on, because you're pursuing the impossible. You mentioned that Soviet dissidents in the Soviet Union, and your own family and my own family. My mother was a political dissident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union would insist, of course, that people were not actually living under communism. One day they would live under communism. One day utopia would be achieved. But no matter how much blood they spill, utopia is never going to get any closer.
Thank you, Daniel. And I remember as a young man reading, Robert Conquest and Solzhenitsyn and all of these works on the Soviet regime and the Soviet tyranny. And I remember it was explained that the killing machine took on a life of its own. And after a while, you don't even need the Yagoda executioners anymore. They might kill all the kulaks, and then they might kill these enemies, and then they'll do this purge and find some more class enemies over here. But once that communist machine, that socialist Marxist killing machine starts, it just doesn't stop, and then it turns on itself. It's killing for its own sake. It's destruction for its own sake. And I think a good hook into your book here is you stress very much that the left is all about destruction, but America is very much about creation. And we need to focus not just fighting against the destructive left, but on also creating things of our own.
Really, the big thing that always infuriated the left about America was that we actually were building a successful alternative. The left is not really worried about fascism. It's not worried about dictatorships. It's not worried about repressive regimes, because you can always organize revolutions against them. It can try to overthrow them. Even if it doesn't, they're not actually an ideological threat, because they can say, we have the Progressive People's Republic of whatever, and that is this horrible, murderous dictatorship. What America did was demonstrate that the entire leftist program was unnecessary, that it was futile, that we could actually give people a good life, a successful life, that we could actually have democracy and freedom without the need for any of the leftist revolutions. And that's why they've spent all these centuries running a war of lies, a war of propaganda, an actual war of violence. Even the conflicts that we're seeing in the street now are based on the same idea. The left has to prove that America is illegitimate. It has to prove that America is illegitimate, because otherwise the left itself would be exposed as illegitimate.
Daniel, so many powerful themes in your work. And so you are documenting the past about the left, showing this is nothing new. What the left is up to today, even what we see happening on the campuses right now, this isn't new. This even happened in the beginning of American history. But the left wants to destroy the past, and you're stressing why it's so important to remember the past. And so when we read, for instance, about the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot, and they were just killing people that wore glasses, they killed people that held hands. They wanted to kill and destroy everything to start the new earth. Why the leftists, I remember when I was writing United in Hate, I was just fascinated with how much the left was in ecstasy at ground zero And I was very interested in that ground zero represented to them the ashes that they want. They want to destroy the old earth. They want to destroy everything, and they want to build their utopia on the ashes of the destruction that they cause. So they don't want us to remember anything. They want to destroy marriage. They want to destroy the nuclear family. Just destroy everything, and then they'll build everything new. You know, there's this individual I was discussing politics with a few weeks ago. It's just incredible, the ignorance. And he says to me, we just need to destroy everything and build everything anew. And I was thinking, like, you know, this isn't a new idea. They tried this before. But Daniel, tell us why it's so important for us to remember the past and to be in touch with the past, and why the left wants so much to erase the past.
One of the great tragedies of the incremental leftist long march, we haven't had a single, decisive revolution. There hasn't been a violent leftist overthrow of the government. What they've done is they've conducted the long march, and part of the long march was they rewrote our own history. The 1619 Project is only the latest example of a long line of leftist reinventions of American history. And the things that I write about in the book, in The Mystic Enemies, they really were fairly well known before the left and the various Marxist professors began rewriting our history to follow the oppressor-oppressed paradigm. And even most conservatives have largely absorbed the oppressed-oppressors paradigm, the one in which America was defined by class conflicts, by economic rivalries, by the persecution of various minorities, and thus everything American history is range wars. It is the worker protests. It's how we treated Black people, how we treated this minority. It's not actual American history. This is Marxist history. And when you actually look at actual American history, the revelations are very important because, among other things, they tell us how the founding fathers, various Americans of various generations, actually dealt with some of these same conflicts. The left always claims that it is a new idea. We represent the youth. We are something new. And part of my mission in the book was to show that the left was actually something quite old. It's been around for a while. We have fought it. We have defeated it before. And the left each time tries to erase its origins. It tries to erase where it came from and start everything anew all over again. And of course, each time it's year zero, we are going to destroy the past. And we have this exciting new idea. Socialism. Look at our youth representative, Bernie Sanders. The reality is socialism is even far older than Bernie Sanders. All these old ideas require covering up the past, not only the failed experiments of the Soviet Union, Communist China, Cuba, so many other places, Cambodia, but you have to actually cover up their role in American history, because if people actually recognize this has been tried before, and all it's done is replace good things that worked with bad things that don't, well, the left would not have a leg to stand on. And part of the importance of looking at history is to recognize, yes, we dealt with this before, we struggled with this before, it did not actually work, we defeated it before, which means that A, we should not try this again, and B, we can actually prevail against it.
Millions and millions and millions killed in the Soviet experiment. Then the Maoist experiment. 70, 80 million right there. Deaths and murders. And Mao was even talked about how important it was to kill millions of people. The blood of humans is going to redeem the earth. And then the Khmer Rouge does it. And then they do it in Vietnam. Then they do it in Eastern Europe. Then Castro does it. Then the Sandinistas do it. And every time they try to build utopia on earth, it leads to earthly hell. But then they're just going to try it again. Just got to try it one more time. And there's nothing wrong with the idea. It's just the people that ruin it. And so let's just give it a different name this time, right? And they just keep giving it different names. And you show that very clearly. And so we think these things are new. And then you take us to a trip to the past and you show that there's just a lot of replays going on. There's a lot of reshowings. All of these things are not new. And so in a recent election, we had a certain pandemic, and one could say it might have influenced the election a little bit. I mean, that's an observation that could be made. But in your book, in one of your chapters, you show that there was also a pandemic at one time, and the Democrats kind of were tinkering with it a little bit. and it's a little bit of an eerie replay. Can you tell us about it?
It was eerie indeed, especially looking at this in 2020.
Mm.
So really for the first big pandemics, the first outbreaks in America were something called yellow fever, which they didn't have a good, clear handle on what caused it at the time. But the big idea was that Aaron Burr, we kind of tend to remember him for having killed Alexander Hamilton, but that comes much later. Aaron Burr at that point is a candidate for the vice presidency. He actually does become vice president. Later, of course, he's put on trial for treason and becomes a notorious disgraced figure. But he's really the man who creates urban political machines in the country. He kickstarts Tammany Hall. He kickstarts also the modern system of running elections. And Aaron Burr works at the yellow fever outbreaks, which have been devastating, by the way. They caused the evacuation of Philadelphia, which was America's first capital. George Washington, everybody else has to just kind of leave the city. Cities are depopulated. They're controlled by roving mobs. That's actually a good deal worse than anything that happened during the so-called pandemic. And at the same time, Burr looks at this and says, well, people are very, very afraid of this. How can I turn it to my political advantage? And what he does is he uses it to transform the election by doing something that Biden didn't, well, not Biden so much as his people did in 2020. He's barely capable of doing anything, but they put on a lot of new voters on the rolls. They did this through remote voting. Wherein Burr figures out how to do is add on a whole lot more voters in order to be able to win New York. So the echoes there were very, very clear. And by winning New York, that helped shape the outcome of the entire presidential election. It got Aaron Burr it made him vice president. He very nearly had a plan for moving Jefferson and also becoming president of the United States. But, beyond whatever happened to him, he really created this entire system for doing things this way. And I should emphasize again, this was the first contested presidential election, which means it really set the pattern for how things were going to happen in the future.
Daniel, the left is always trying to destroy the nuclear family, husband and wife, sexual morality, faithfulness, parents, children. Today, when we look at the drag queens dancing in front of kids in libraries, sometimes I wonder, how come they're not dancing for senior citizens in old age homes? They're dancing in front of the kids. But we'll get to that another time. But I think about Fyodor Dostoevsky, what a prophet. And in many of his works, but especially in The Devils, he writes about how these revolutionaries are planning, and they're saying we'll just cause mass promiscuity and all this sexual freedom and promiscuity. And within all of this sexual perversion and promiscuity, then we'll build the dictatorship. What a prophet in many respects. And then Lenin comes around. And we know that whole Leninist philosophy and what they tried to implement about free sex and free love and promiscuity and getting rid of that bond between the man and the woman and that faithfulness. And we think about, it's very interesting that the Bible wants and teaches us, and our Creator and our Lord wants the man with the woman to be faithful to one another, and that's it, and to have a family. And then the left wants the opposite of that. Even the Weather Underground, what they wanted within their own ranks. They didn't want, jealousy, that's just a man-made thing, and there shouldn't be boyfriend or girlfriend or husband and wife. They also wanted all of that, the promiscuity amongst all of their members. And you show back in the early 19th century, mid-19th century, these communist communes that wanted to abolish marriage and private property, etc. But it's kind of a terrifying, scary chapter that you show, because they're just going to create free love, and they're going to create this utopia, and all you see is all this, you see Hades. Tell us about that.
So even starting out in the 1820s and the 1830s, you had these first communes in America, and the people who lived in them were known as communists. Now, every leftist revolution, as you kind of mentioned, really was accompanied by this kind of promiscuity. And the central idea of all this was that we're going to abolish private property, which means nothing is exclusive to anybody. And of course, it means that in relationships, nothing is exclusive to anybody. You're not going to have a husband and wife. You're not going to have a woman who's exclusive to one man or a man who's exclusive to one woman. And then also, you're not going to have children that are exclusive to one parent or one couple. The children are in common, everything is in common, the men and the women are all in common, and the property is all in common. This is really the essence of what communism originally was. You would have these communes in order to be able to experiment with this whole entirely idealized new way of life, which of course would usher in promiscuity, would shatter the basic normal human bonds. And this is a very important issue for the left, because the left really needs to be able to reinvent, as we discussed earlier, everything from scratch. It needs to start everything from scratch, which means demolishing every kind of human relationship and every kind of human norm. And the family is the most fundamental norm of all. And when you really see the extremes, you really see various fascist communist movements, they go after the family, they go after human relationships, and make sure there can be nothing outside of their system. And they're still very much at it today, as we unfortunately see all too often. And back 200 years ago, they were at this again. They were creating communes in which they set out to abolish the institution of marriage. Of course, they abolished private property. And they had this vision of utopian societies in which children would have no relationships with their parents, in which husbands and wives, there would be no husbands and wives, men and women would just freely drift. And that would be this ideal society. And why is it an ideal society? Because the left would have total control. There would be nothing there except the left, not even human relationships.
And what you describe in this utopia, they're just creating this heaven on earth and everybody's having free love and it's just going to be great. And there's women that are saying, this guy is coming into my room raping me every evening. Can I have a lock on my door? And they're not even allowing locks. And because locks are from the old oppressive patriarchal world. And there's actually real abuse going on and rape going on of women, and they can't lock the door. And then there was also a lot of racism and just really horrifying things that you've documented, Daniel.
Yeah, one of the first of these communes in America was based on slave labor, because who's going to work for free? Well, if you get slaves to work for you, you can then use them as experiments. And the entire idea of the commune, by the way, including the Soviet collective farms, a lot of that dates back to a French socialist named Fourier, again, very early in the 19th century. And he has this idea, there's not going to be families, there isn't going to be marriage, everybody's going to live on these massive communes with thousands of people there. And as far as relationships go, there's going to be a ritualized prostitution core of women who are going to be there to service men. And this guy is really the apex of the philosopher of these communes and these socialist systems. And this is what they were thinking of to begin with. So sexual abuse was very much always on the menu. It's core to these leftist systems, because what the left really promises, what it really offers, is the opportunity to abuse other people, to take their property, to have power over them. That is the real secret appeal of the left.
And they really don't want a man and a woman to love each other and to be a unit unto themselves and to be faithful to each other and to love each other and just to be completely loyal to one another. That is one of the greatest threats to the totalitarian order, isn't it?
It is indeed. You're only supposed to love the beloved leader. You're supposed to love the doctrine. You are not supposed to love each other. There's not supposed to be any conflicts there. The leftist man gods are very jealous gods, and you shall have nothing else to worship, not churches, not synagogues, not other people over them.
Mm-hmm. And they literally banned marriage, right?
Yeah, well, the whole premise of these communes was that there would be no marriage within these. We have these Hamas occupations on campuses, and we have the Chazes they created. The left has been creating these all over the time. And yes, the first thing you do is you grab the space and you abolish all the existing rules and you impose your own rules within the space. So the communes had that premise that we're going to abolish marriage, we're going to abolish religion, and of course, we're going to abolish private property and then begin everything anew.
What a narrative, the left. Daniel, so we look, for instance, at Obama and how he poured fuel on the fires of race relations and how he wanted to exacerbate racial tensions, how he wanted all these racial problems, and he fanned the flames, and the left always fans the flames. And we know that Black Lives Matter. I don't know really how much they helped black people. I don't know what they built or how many schools they built or how many community centers they built. It's very interesting what they did with their money, but it was definitely a destructive movement. But this is nothing new. And in chapter 6, you show that in the mid-19th century, the Democrats also set off race riots to influence a certain election. So we just keep going back in time, and we realize that a lot of things are just replays now, and they were rehearsals back then. What happened?
Well, the Democrats went from promoting massive race riots by white people against black people to promoting massive riots by black people against white people. And the difference is simply tactical. It's not as if they believed one or the other. They just really found it very useful to be able to get a mob and get that mob to go after their political opponents. Back then, black people tended to vote Republican. It's actually kind of interesting. You look at the black vote from the beginning of the history of this country, it tended to be more conservative. They tended to initially vote for the Federalists, then they voted for the Republicans. And the draft riots, which some people may have heard about, were part of this massive plot to, first of all, upend the upcoming presidential election involving Lincoln, but also to push Republicans out of cities like New York. That part absolutely succeeded. So they targeted black people back then who tended to vote Republican. They targeted Republicans in general with massive riots. And they also planned to seize control of entire cities, New York City, Chicago, some other cities, in order to be able to secede and declare their own, leftist Chaz of the day. The secession part did not work. The presidential election part also did not work. Ultimately, if anything, the riots probably helped Lincoln rather than hurt him. But they did succeed in pushing Republicans out of New York City. So one of the reasons New York City has become such a Democrat and leftist enclave was that race riots organized by the Democrats made it that way.
Fascinating. And what not just a profound book, but you're a superb writer, Daniel, and it's on the edge of your seat reading. I got to give you that as well. Let's take a quick break with our sponsors.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back! The My Pillow guy!
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0.
Wow, it's so soft and smooth.
It's cool to the touch. How did you do that?
Well, we took My Pillow's patented fill and combined it with this new technology that we didn't have back then when I invented My Pillow to bring you the best pillow in history, My Pillow 2.0. Just like all of you, I never imagined that My Pillow could get any better. That's why I haven't changed it in nearly 20 years. Then I heard about a revolutionary new technology, and I knew I had to bring it to you all. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
The My Pillow 2.0 is cooler and softer than the last My Pillow. It is so comfortable to sleep on at night. I look forward to going to bed, and I wake up well rested in the morning.
Sleep is all about temperature and height. My Pillow 2.0's patented adjustable fill is going to give you the exact individual support you need from your head to your bed. And now here's where it gets even better. We've all experienced those temperature-related sleep interruptions where you get too hot, you toss and turn, you flip your pillow over to the cool side. Well, all that's gone with my brand new My Pillow 2.0 cooling fabric that's made with temperature-regulating thread.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a MyPillow or not, you need to get the brand new MyPillow 2.0. Call or go to MyPillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit mypillow.com.
And that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure to go to mypillow.com or mystore.com and use promo code GG21. You can get a discount of up to 60% off of all amazing products, and you're also helping the great Mike Lindell as well as the Glazov Gang. If you like one-of-a-kind handmade art, make sure to go to lutfstudio.com and purchase resin art pieces made by our one and only Annie Cyrus. Make sure to use the promo code GLAZOV to get special discounts. Daniel Greenfield, how are you doing with your pillow?
Comfortable as a puppy on the couch.
But do you have a Mike Lindell pillow?
Obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't be comfortable.
Okay, fantastic. Daniel, let's get back to your book. Fascinating read, one of the most urgent books out there right now, and I would say one of the most important and vital works written on American history and for the political scene right now and for the future. Daniel, crystallize for us just here. There's these two revolutions, the French Revolution, the American Revolution. Crystallize for us how they were different and what the founding fathers were up against, because the people that believed in the principles of the French Revolution very much wanted the American Revolution to go that way. And we very much face those problems today in terms of those forces.
The American Revolution was a revolution for independence. Its goal was to return power to the people. The French Revolution, like most leftist revolutions, did say that it wanted power for the people, but by the people, of course, it meant a radical leftist ruling class that would impose its will on the people and create virtue. So the premise of the American Revolution was that the American people were virtuous, which was an easier sell back then than it might be today, and that a virtuous people could be left alone to conduct their affairs without government oversight all the time. The French Revolution's premise was that its goal was to create virtue, to impose virtue, to be a dictatorship of virtue on the people in order to create this ideal society. The American Revolution was premised on the right of the individual to pursue their own happiness, whereas the French Revolution's idea was that the government's role was to provide happiness. And we very much see this today. This is still really the core conflict in America. We have various elements of the conflict between the left and the traditional American way of life. But really, this is the core conflict. Are you going to just impose the right way, the right order in order to create utopia, or are you going to actually allow people to pursue their own happiness, their own approach? And when you try to actually create this ideal society, you are obviously going to be doomed to fail. And as we discussed earlier, the only way to remedy that is to force the people into the round hole, the square hole that your ideology has created for them. So you're going to oppress them, you're going to persecute them, you're going to arrest them, you're going to lock them up, you're going to pass more and more laws. And of course, none of this is ever going to be sufficient. So you unleash one reign of terror, another reign of terror. And that's just what the French Revolution did. It initially killed political opponents. Then it discovered that its own people were political opponents, and they began killing each other. The conservatives disappeared, the moderates disappeared, even the leftists began purging each other, and the process would have continued indefinitely or until a completely brutal dictator arose, as it did in the Soviet Union and in other communist dictatorships, until the whole system was overthrown and collapsed. And this is so alien to the American experience, where the American experience was we have a fairly loose government. George Washington was there as a kind of placeholder, unifying figure. But the goal of the government was not to exercise a great deal of authority, but to allow the American people to function, to maintain the American experiment against external threats, but not to regulate the daily life of the average American.
Daniel, our founding fathers agonized while they were creating this wonderful, precious experiment. They knew and understood that there had to be virtue in order for this experiment to work. And so the left wants to destroy virtue. And we see very much the consequences of that today. And Ronald Reagan, he said that, we know, just before I say about Reagan, we begin to understand that freedom is not a natural state. We have to constantly cultivate and fertilize it and fight for it. And Reagan said in that famous quote that he had, that every generation is one generation away from slavery, and we have to constantly shed our blood to to remain free. So we have to remain vigilant because the left is at war 24/7. It's trying to destroy 24/7. Whereas the problem with conservatives on many levels is we want to live too. A lot of conservatives, they don't want to fight all the time, but the left is fighting 24/7. So the conservatives have to learn to fight. And this is where the brilliant David Horowitz has given his advice. He was in the belly of the beast, and he's saying, look, these individuals and people and forces hate you. You got to fight them. And so you were showing that, yes, the founding fathers stood up against these forces, and many conservatives fought and fought and fought. But we may have won a lot of the battles, but today definitely the war is slowly being lost. And tell us about how we're losing that war today and why in connection to your book.
Well, we've been losing the war for quite a while, and you kind of got at one issue, which is complacency, which is that we take it for granted that the other side believes basically the same things that we do. Whereas in reality, the left, as yes, David Horowitz has repeatedly pointed out, is animated by a fanatical conviction, as he puts it in his latest book, America Betrayed. To the left, if you really do believe that you can create a society in which no child will not ever have to go hungry, in which there will never have to be any oppression or inequality or poverty, then what would you not do to create that society? Would you not betray? Would you not kill? Would you not commit any kind of crime to create the heaven and earth? And this is absolutely what the left is animated by. And by breaking this up, by breaking their agenda up into these little pieces, they've made it somewhat invisible for a lot of people. When there's a single revolution, when there's a single, communist overthrow, there is something to push back against. But when there isn't an obvious outside force, and this way the Cold War is actually helpful because we could see an example of communism out there, we could see what it was like, and thus we knew to be wary of it. But when it's broken up, as liberalism so often does, as various leftist movements so much do, into these various incremental things that look like progress, we don't know enough to spot it. We often don't know enough to resist it. And we don't understand what a threat it really is. What's the harm in trying this? We have so much poverty. What's the harm in doing some more welfare? We have homelessness. What's the harm in creating an entire government agency to deal with this problem? What's the harm in it? Well, if you have an entity like the Soviet Union, you start being able to communicate to people what the harm is. Without that, we have trouble doing that. But the left's increasing radicalism, its fanaticism, has made it easier to convey, well, this is what the harm is. Look at the campus riots. Look at the violence in the streets in 2020. It becomes easier to convey this is what the harm is.
Daniel, you stress very much how it's important for us to remain in touch with our roots. And because the left wants a blank slate, they want to destroy our connection to our roots and also to our faith. I'm a Christian, you're of the Jewish faith. There's a lot that brings us together, I would think, including the Psalms. Why I bring this up is, and this is all interconnected, Joe Biden, I remember, referred to the Psalms as the palms. I'm a little bit surprised that more wasn't said about that. I mean, that should be front page news. This is a Catholic. This is a devout Catholic that goes to church. Daniel, how can you be a devout Catholic? How can you be a devout Jewish person and call the Psalms the palms? What does this say about who this guy is? And it's very interconnected with how the left really has no touch with their faith and with our roots and with our faith, with our belief system.
Well, in all fairness, Joe Biden was, as he put it, raised in the black church on the Reverend Corn Pop, when he wasn't actually spending all of his time in the synagogue, again, his own words, but when he wasn't spending his time in with his Latino abuela, and when he wasn't spending all of his time in the mosque. So it's understandable he'd be a little confused on these points and various other points, but I think it's fair to say that Joe Biden, like, pretty much every Democrat, beginning with Bill Clinton, has no meaningful religious ties or religious connections. And this is not surprising for a political party, really, where Christianity has fallen by the wayside anyway. I wrote, and this was a while back, I think by now approaching a decade, that for the first time, the majority of white Democrats were not Christian, were not religious. I think the numbers, if anything, are even worse. And I would imagine that the majority of Democrats, the vast majority of Democrats under 30 are no longer religious at all. And the numbers are only going to accelerate because this is a party really that already has a religion, and its religion is leftism. Its politicians feel the need to occasionally pretend to be religious. I mean, Hillary Clinton pretended to be religious. Does anybody seriously believe, whatever your party, whatever your politics are, does anybody seriously believe that Hillary Clinton has any kind of faith or any kind of religious belief? Of course not. And, the more as a country we become involved with politics, the more we believe that we can control everything, that politics itself is the ultimate determinator of everything. Well, the more we become a secular country, because politics becomes religion. And that is what the left wants. The left can triumph in multiple ways. And one of the ways that the left can triumph is by taking away the soul of its opponents, by convincing them to pervert their beliefs, to become a mockery of what they were, to let go of their strength. And this is one of the reasons why I actually wrote this book, because it is important for us to remember the sources of our strength, just as it's important for us to hold on to our faith, because when we lose those connections, then the left wins by default. The left doesn't always have to defeat us in the streets. It can enable us to defeat ourselves.
Absolutely. But Daniel, just an individual that poses as a Catholic and calls the Psalms the Palms, I think it kind of says everything, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it does. This is a hollow man, a man with no actual knowledge or beliefs, who pretends to be different sorts of things in order to convince very stupid people that he's one of them.
But how can you call the Psalms the Palms? Let's let that go for a minute. It just should have been on the front page news everywhere, if anything. Daniel, so we know that the left has so many advantages in how it does battle. In a free society, we have a lot of disadvantages when we face these monstrous demons trying to destroy us. But you stress that there is grounds for hope on several levels, and one of the grounds for hope is that these totalitarian movements are also self-destructive. They turn inward. You refer to it as the undoing by their own overreaches. You talk about it's like a man sawing away at the ladder beneath his feet. And so that gives us some hope that these tyrannies and totalitarian regimes and movements, they don't have every advantage over us. They self-destruct, don't they? Unfortunately, they cause a lot of pain in the process. But go ahead.
Exactly. So it's a basic matter of history that every leftist regime, every truly leftist regime, eventually self-destructs. There are no really ancient leftist regimes around for a reason, because what they're aspiring to is impossible. They can only go one of two routes. One is they completely wreck everything in pursuit of the impossible, or two, they let go of whatever leftist dream they had, much as the Soviet Union did in its latter days, or communist China has done. They let go of the ideology and they just become a generic dictatorship. So the left itself is unsustainable. It's like one of the exotic elements on the periodic table. It can only survive exposed to air and light for only so long. But of course, as you pointed out, they can do incredible amounts of damage along the way. So yes, the left ultimately will destroy itself, and maybe the creator made it that way. The Tower of Babel has to ultimately fall, but obviously we do not want the left to get to the point where it actually has that kind of power. We want to destroy it. We want to prevent it from taking power. We want to restrain it, reduce it as much as possible.
In my homework for this interview, I had the honor and pleasure of watching the great Annie Cyrus interview you. And our viewers got to check that interview out. Fantastic interview. Annie, what was it like to interview the great Daniel Greenfield? And what are your thoughts on this interview? Make sure to tell everybody where to go watch your interview as well, Annie.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. Well, I always enjoy listening to Daniel and talking to him anyways, but I would say it was definitely very educational. The interview I did with him, which he gave me the privilege to come on my show, it was very educational because most of the topic were, one, part of history of America I wasn't familiar with, and also the connection of me personally asking how could this be? And then you read the book, and then you talk to Daniel and ask your own questions, and the connection is so perfectly made there. So it was definitely very educational for me. And I had audience reaching out saying they're going to grab a copy of the book, and they learned a lot. And people can watch it. Just go to liveuptofreedom.com right there on the homepage. You'll see the video link. And your interview, of course, I mean, you can't get a better match than Dr. Jamie Glazov and Daniel Greenfield educating the public. And you asked your own questions, just like I asked mine. And I agree with you, Jamie. This is a must-read book. This isn't something of, well, let me get to it when I have time. At least for me, it's like everything makes much more sense. And I'm going to grab everything you talked about and connect it to literally last week or 10 days of, look, we're getting ready for Summer of Love 2024 with all the university riots going on. Grab this book and read it, and you're like, okay, I know what the plan is. I know where they're going with it. And as Daniel said, I know how to get involved to defeat it. So I suggest everybody grab a copy if you haven't yet. And Daniel, as I said on my interview with you as well, I am very grateful that you wrote this book. It is very needed, not just for now, but I feel like the younger generation will come to realize a lot of mistakes they're making right now without looking into what they're stepping into, like getting involved with these riots at universities, or waving their prayer rug, not even knowing what they're saying or what they're walking into. Reading this book can definitely teach them, at least look at the history of this tyrannical regime before screaming their name and getting behind them. So thank you for writing the book.
Thank you so much, Annie. It was a really fantastic interview. And it's interesting to me, we're talking about American history. We're all immigrants here. And, that has taught us to appreciate American history better than, some Americans like Bill Clinton, for example.
Absolutely. Or even the most recent ones. I'll talk about my very special friend, Ilhan Omar. I mean, everything America offered this woman, as she screamed having PTSD and flashbacks of war during Trump administration, but she never says, thank you, America, for saving my life and giving me a chance to be a representative in Congress of United States of America with interests of people of Somalia in mind, of course. She only sees the negative. She only, as you said during this interview, she's part of the plan to get close to the utopia that will never happen, but they don't know that. So again, people need to read this book. One, you appreciate the history if you love history like I do. Two, you might actually wake up to what is happening. A lot of people, Daniel, think all of this is just, it's happening because it's happening. They don't see the pattern. They don't know the pattern. They think this is all just politics. So your book will help them understand it's way more than just politics.
Annie, thank you so much. Daniel, why don't we, I think it would be very appropriate, if that's one word we can use, to talk about these demonstrations, if that's one way we would call them, on the campuses right now. I devoted my whole life to trying to understand this. One thing that I'm very interested in is all these leftist students, first of all, what they look like, but they're bowing down and they're doing this Islamic thing. And I wrote about this in United in Hate. I was always following how the left worships at the altar of the tyrannies, what the fellow travelers did. And something I feel that I can contribute, because I don't see it being discussed. You see them all in these leftists with the masks, not just the keffiyehs on, but the masks of the pandemic. And a lot of people, they don't talk about it, or they think they're just trying to use it as a disguise, or maybe they're afraid of catching, of getting sick. Yeah, that's true, but it's much deeper than that. And as you know, Daniel, and the left worshipped at the altar of Maoist unisex clothing. The left worshipped at the altar of the burqa and the hijab. There is this longing of self-extinction, of imposing sameness on everybody, of destroying one's own individuality, and finding immortality in the collective. But I'll leave it at that right now. But Daniel, you know what I'm referring to because you've given a lot of thought to this yourself. There's no coincidence here that the jihadists are wearing their own facial covering and that the left is wearing their own facial covering. And but let's end with this here. Daniel, what are your thoughts in terms of domestic enemies? And now we see it all come full circle with these leftists prostrating themselves on the ground and worshiping Islam and screaming Allahu Akbar and screaming for the Intifada. And a lot of commentators always say, this is shocking, this is crazy, they're insane. Yeah, all that is true, but it makes complete sense.
You were here very early with United in Hate, which is an absolutely brilliant book that everybody should absolutely read. Really tying together the Red-Green Alliance. And this is really based on the idea that we discussed earlier, which is that the left thrives on destruction and they need their special garb, they need their special identity. What really motivates them is a power fantasy. They want to play dress up, they want to tear apart everything that is and replace it with their ideal world. They're kind of evil, demented children, and that's something that we've seen over and over again. People say, how can Islam and communists possibly align? And don't these purple-haired people understand that they'd be the first thrown off buildings? Maybe yes, no, it's really irrelevant. You think about the Soviet Union and Communist China, how many gay rights did they have there? What was the state of their unions? What was their view on abortions? No, 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 and no. The various leftist dictatorships had no tolerance for any of the sort of stuff that leftists in the Western countries promoted, zero tolerance for it. So it's really not all that different. And it's the different distinction between what they claim to want and what they really want. They claim that they want abortions. They claim that they want their be able to experiment with their gender fluid lifestyles. They claim that what they want is X, what they really want is Y, which is power. It's a totalitarian system, and Islam fits the bill quite perfectly. Islam offers an inflexible totalitarian system, one that promises to tear apart the world and remake it completely in order to create this perfect ideal world. So they are fine with it. For all that they may pledge allegiance and they've got the they, them pronouns, there you can see them, bowing, praying to Allah, always pretending to do it because they're united, as you put it, united in hate, but they're united in creating this new world order.
What a perfect, profound ending to our discussion this evening, Daniel. Thank you so much for being such a courageous and bold and I would say genius, heroic truth teller on the front lines. What a vital book, Domestic Enemies, the Founding Fathers' Fight Against the Left. You can get it at Amazon, but first, please go to frontpagemag.com and get it at the Front Page Mag bookstore. Daniel, before we go, tell people what I might have missed out, where they need to be following you, and also maybe other places you'd like them to get the book, about your own website. Let's not leave before you do a little bit of Don King self-promotion.
Only in America, only on frontpagemag.com. Well, I have the honor of being at frontpagemag.com, where I work with you and a lot of talented people. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm there at Sultan Nish, and I've got my own site, danielgreenfield.org.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Daniel, so much for visiting us this evening. Thank you for writing Domestic Enemies.
Thank you for a great conversation.
What an honor. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for visiting us. Once again, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click instant notifications, the bell. Subscribe to us at Rumble. Click instant notifications. Follow us at jamieglazov.com. Follow Jamie Glazov, me, on Twitter. Make sure you are visiting Annie Cyrus at liveuptofreedom.com. And when you finish watching this show, if you haven't already, go to frontpagemag.com and order Domestic Enemies and follow Daniel Greenfield everywhere you can. We'll see you soon. Good night.